This is Carl Hughes with Town Square Media, your host for Issues and Answers. Issues and Answers is a public affairs program for Western Colorado. Residents and members of our community tell us what concerns they have, and from that feedback, we identify significant issues to include in our weekly program. Today, my guest is Andrea Thomas, Executive Director for the Voices for Awareness Foundation. Today, we will be discussing the increasing threat and harm from illicit drugs, especially fentanyl, and the risks posed to our communities. Andrea, welcome to Issues and Answers.
Thank you for having me.
If you could, tell us a little history of Voices for Awareness and what your mission is.
Well, Voices was founded by myself and Deanne Hopkins in 2018. I had lost my oldest daughter, Ashley, to fentanyl poisoning in 2018. At the time of losing my daughter, I did not even know what fentanyl was. And in researching and looking for information on fentanyl, I found very little. And so at that point, we decided to start our foundation and bring awareness to the dangers of fentanyl.
Well, let's talk a little bit then about fentanyl itself. Now, as I understand it, it's a synthetic opioid in the same class as morphine and hydrocodone. And its use and abuse have many side effects from what I've seen and read, including addiction and obviously even death. What can you tell me about what you learned about fentanyl and what fentanyl is?
Fentanyl is so very potent. It's like we've never seen a drug like this before. As little as 2 milligrams of fentanyl can cause sudden death. And death by fentanyl is basically a form of suffocation. It shuts down your neuro and your respiratory system, and you can die in minutes or seconds. It's being found in almost every drug that's out there today.
Now, why is it being found in so many other drugs? Is the chemical high or the response that people have from the fentanyl something that, makes people want to buy more of those drugs? Or why is it becoming so prevalent?
Cartels are very creative. They are going to produce something that there is a high demand for. And we're just coming out of a opioid, have been currently in an opioid epidemic. And people want pills. Before, prescription drugs did not seem deadly. That stands the same today. So the cartels produce these fentanyl pills. Fentanyls is what we call them a lot of times. And people aren't as frightened of taking something that looks like a prescription pill. We call these counterfeits. In many cases, people don't even know that they're taking something that's counterfeit. They think it is just someone else's prescription medicine. So the cartels are selling these pills. They're so very deadly, and now they've decided they're going to add this fentanyl into the other drugs, cocaine, heroin, other counterfeit pills, Oxycontin, Percocet, Adderall. The demand is so very high that they're selling millions of these pills.
And from what you were saying, the counterfeit pills, it sounds like they're made to look identical to what a prescription pill would be, so that truly the person who's buying them illegally has no way of knowing whether that's, truly an original pill and that it's at the accurate dose or any of that.
Exactly. So in my daughter's case, she died from taking half of a counterfeit pill that was laced with fentanyl. They tell us that 3 and 5 pills are deadly. These pills are made out in a jungle somewhere or in a clandestine laboratory, and so there's no exact science to it. Fentanyl is thrown in a pot with everything, the other chemicals, and it clumps. And so some pills are more deadly than others.
That's just frightening for everybody who's out there that are so unaware and struggling with addiction or whatever may be the reason that they are taking those pills. I read some statistics that I thought were overwhelming. Opioid overdoses rose by 54% in Colorado in 2020, and nearly 2 in 3 overdose deaths in Colorado were from opioids. And fentanyl, specifically, overdoses from fentanyl became more common, more than doubling between 2019 and 20, and just that 1 year, they more than doubled. And in the 4 years between 2016 and 2020, fentanyl overdoses went up by 10 times. So obviously, this is a crisis. Are these numbers, which are horrible, they can get worse, can't they?
They can.
Or they are.
We're seeing deaths increase, the numbers of deaths increase daily, not just here in Colorado, but all over the United States. And when we look at this problem, if it continues to grow like it is now, and especially with the amount of fentanyl that's coming into the United States, these numbers will skyrocket in the next 2 years of time. How high will those numbers be then?
Fentanyl, it sounds like with the increasing prevalence in everything laced into other drugs by themselves, it must be pretty affordable for the cartels to manufacture.
Yes, and that's why they use fentanyl as a replacement for heroin. It costs the cartels between 1 and 4 cents to make one of these pills. And they were selling 2 years ago on the street for $25 to $35, depending how many you bought. Now we're seeing them selling for $3, $4. They're so prevalent and so easily accessible and so deadly that the problem is just growing at an exponential rate.
Well, and a pill that costs 2 cents to manufacture and sells for $3, that's 150% markup for the cartels. So there's sadly still value there for them.
Yes, and the amount of fentanyl that's being seized today is between 10 and 15% of what's actually getting into the country. So when you look at these news broadcasts and you see that there was a seizure of 3 kilos of fentanyl or fentanyl pills, that's nothing. It is the cost of doing business to the cartel members. So they're not being affected with what we're able to seize in the United States.
One of the things that I'll skip a little ahead to on my notes when we're talking about dropping the bucket and really what it's costing the cartels, 3 years ago, and I was shocked to see this, 3 years ago in Colorado, we passed a bill basically decriminalizing the possession of fentanyl and other Schedule I and Schedule II controlled substances from a felony to a misdemeanor. So now if you had up to 4 grams of fentanyl, which is enough literally to kill thousands of people, it's basically just a ticket, not a felony. Is Colorado going to fix that?
I sure hope so. There are a lot of people out there, Voices for Awareness included, working on legislation and talking to people about these laws. Most people don't even know this law exists. When the law was put into effect, I don't think the consideration of fentanyl being in all illicit drugs that we see today was considered. And we see our crime rates increasing. We see a recidivism rate on repeat offenders increasing. And this really needs to be addressed because these are distributor amounts. They're not personal use amounts. And like you said, such a small amount of fentanyl can kill someone. If you were looking at 4 grams of an illicit drug that contained fentanyl, that could take thousands of lives.
I think a lot of us, the old ostrich in the sand metaphor, if it doesn't directly impact us or our families, many of us are just completely unaware, short of a news story after a drug bust or something happens, how much the drug issue affects our community. Here in the Grand Valley, actually in all of western Colorado, I know it's an ongoing problem. Methamphetamine or meth, heroin, cocaine, even OxyContin. How prevalent do you think our drug problem is? Is it much greater than most of us are aware of?
Yes, we're losing people every day, even here in the Grand Valley. And we don't hear about those deaths. This isn't something that's publicized. And so I think people would be shocked to know how fentanyl is affecting the valley. We look at crime rates, and we went through this time with COVID, and if you look at data, it will tell you that crime's gone down. Well, the fact of the matter is that the arrest rates were lower during the time of COVID because there was restrictions in our jails, and the reality of it is that fentanyl is not only killing people, it's affecting our community in other ways. So it's something we need to address.
Now, you mentioned fentanyl being manufactured by the cartels overseas, is any of it ever manufactured either locally or here in the United States, or is it almost all brought in from across other countries?
Well, what we see are these fentanyl and analogs coming over from China. They're going to the Mexican cartels. The cartels are manufacturing the pills and putting fentanyl into the other illicit drugs. Then they're bringing it into the U.S. The China is laundering the money for the cartels, so they're working together. And it's a huge problem. They're making trillions and trillions of dollars. And a lot of times we look at these distribution crimes and we say, well, they're not violent acts. Well, if you took it from the top all the way to the street, they're very, very violent crimes. And so we need to look at the way that we think about distribution.
Just a personal editorial comment here. Any unnecessary death from an overdose feels like a violent crime. When somebody suffers because of this, it doesn't have to be a weapons violence or anything like that. Just the fact that our citizens are being exposed to such a deadly scourge, that to me feels violent.
Yes, exactly. And we've got to address the laws that are in place now. We need laws that back law enforcement up to be able to do their jobs and protect us from these distribution crimes, from these deadly crimes. And we need to address distribution crimes that result in death. It's not okay to kill someone. If you hit someone with a car, whether you and killed them and you intentionally meant to do it or not, you would be accountable for their death. And it needs to be that way with fentanyl.
So one last question. People can obviously get poisoned from a variety of chemicals that are out there. What's the distinction between a poisoning and an actual overdose?
People look at this as overdose. They think that it can only affect people that are addicted to drugs, drug users. And that's not what we're seeing. Like I said before, we're seeing first-time users dying, people experimenting for the first time dying or taking something that they believe to be a prescription drug. When you talk to other affected family members, we're going to tell you that these are poisonings. These aren't overdoses. When you take something that's presented to be something else, like a prescription pain pill, and you're not aware of what's in it, that's a poisoning, not an overdose.
Well, and it seems like the distinction there is both intent in the person who created the event. An overdose is, I knew I was taking probably more pills than I should. That was my decision and it was dangerous. But a poisoning is a criminal act. It's where someone else is putting something into my system that I wasn't aware of. And I think that's a huge, very important distinction.
Yes, it is. We have a lot of our own terminology within these affected family groups and our fentanyl coalitions.
For those that are just joining us, my name is Carl Hughes, and you are listening to Issues and Answers. Today, my guest is Andrea Thomas, Executive Director for the Voices for Awareness Foundation, and we are discussing an incredibly important topic, the increasing threat and harm from illicit drugs, especially fentanyl, and that risk to our community. So you talked a little bit about the supply chain from raw materials in China to the cartels who are creating the pills and mixing it in other illegal drugs. Generally here, and especially in our community, is it primarily just sold in pills? Is it being mixed in with other drugs more frequently? How do we see it here?
Well, it started coming to the U.S. in pill form. Now it is in almost all illicit drugs, all street drugs. And so you're seeing very few drug crimes with actual heroin or other opioids. You're seeing fentanyl come up in mostly everything that's being tested out on the street.
Well, you talked about several years ago a fentanyl pill going for $20 or $30, now available for $3. That obviously is going to have a terrible relationship to the amount of consumption of those pills because they became more affordable. Really, it's all across our community, and I would suspect in our schools as well.
Yes, and we need to really concentrate on prevention. Our youth are our most important asset to the community, to our families. They need to have prevention tools for themselves. They need to know what's out there. Youth are accessing these deadly pills through Snapchat and other social media apps. You can have these pills delivered to your house as easy as you can get a pizza. So we've got to talk to our kids and make them aware of how deadly fentanyl is. It's like playing Russian roulette. There's not a do-over in many of these situations. We have college students that are taking Adderall pills. They think it's helping them to focus with their studies, and really they can be a first-time user and think they're taking a prescription pill, and that pill will take their life.
Just yesterday, 5 people died in Commerce City, and that's yesterday from when this recording is happening. 5 people died in Commerce City, apparently by accidentally overdosing on fentanyl, which was laced into the cocaine they were ingesting. Again, I think we may have addressed this, but it still perplexes me. What's the reason for mixing it in other than it makes something that's more potent and more enjoyable and makes people want to buy more? Is that why it's getting mixed in?
No, a lot of times these users think that they are using the drugs of 5 or 10 years ago, right? But fentanyl is different from any drug we've ever seen. Manufacturers are putting it in all drugs out there because it's cheaper for them. We call this the new paradigm. The drug landscape has changed from prescription opioid epidemic that was fueled really by a legal system of drug abuse. And the opioid epidemic, we saw prescription drugs causing death, long-term use of them, and other side effects from these drugs. People were committing suicide. They were harming themselves. With fentanyl, addicts often don't have time to recover or even survive. It's more addictive and it kills faster. So recovery is likely not an option in most cases. The rate of death is skyrocketing.
Now, the name of the medication eludes me at this moment, but I know for some opioid overdoses, there's a medication that first responders can administer to reverse the effects of opioid and prevents it by being taken up in the system. Does that same medication work for fentanyl?
Well, it does work for fentanyl in some cases. It's called naloxone or Narcan, as most people know it to be. The thing about it is we used to see people revived from 1 or 2 shots of Narcan. Now, with all of the analogs that we have out there, carfentanil, it's taking multiple doses of Narcan to revive people. And with fentanyl, if you reach a certain point and you are revived, many times people are left in a vegetative state. This really attacks your system fast and shuts everything down. There's very little time, but Narcan is a safety measure that first responders and people should have available to them to reverse the effects of fentanyl.
A thought occurs to me as we were talking about the cartels in Mexico that are producing the actual fentanyl pills and then are also lacing it in with many other illicit substances. I assume there's not a single cartel. There must be multiple cartels that are doing this. And that would then lead to the assumption that the potency and the danger from any given batch is just wildly open to chance. So you never know from one pill to the next who manufactured it and what that pill contains as far as the lethal dosage.
Definitely. I mean, they make these pills with all types of things. There's all kinds of chemicals that are added as fillers. But fentanyl is, like I said, a drug like we've never seen before. If you were in my world and had all of the information that I get daily, we even see fentanyl to be a weapon of mass destruction in some arenas because the chemical capabilities are there for chemical warfare. We don't hear a lot about that, but it is a fact. It can happen, and it's happened in other places of the world before.
So awareness, part of your name, which I think is well placed, awareness is really what we need for this. Now, I know your organization, Voices for Awareness, has partnered with several local agencies to help raise awareness. Tell me what that's like or who you're working with and what we can do to help increase awareness.
Well, the goal is to equip the community with knowledge to prevent fentanyl harm in the first place. Like I said, prevention is the way to start. Deadly amounts of fentanyl can be hidden in illicit drugs that resemble prescriptions. People need to know that. We're losing a lot of first-time users or people experimenting, which is a part of most people's growing up, right? It's critical to us to have a multi-agency response. And all of the partners that are working on our fentanyl initiative have something to offer to law enforcement, health, the courts. Our partners right now are our district attorney, Dan Rubenstein, the Western Colorado Drug Task Force, Sheriff, Mesa County Sheriff, and Grand Junction Police, our health department, community hospital, and our county commissioner, Roland, all came forward to participate in this initiative, finding it to be very important to the Valley.
Well, and this is an issue that doesn't have time to develop a good response, and we'll form some groups and study it. This is a crisis that is living in our community and living in our area now. And I assume in our schools, you mentioned college, I would assume that it's even into the high schools, or scarily enough, maybe even into the middle schools if it's that readily available.
Yes, and like I said, the cartels can put this into anything, and there are bad actors all the time that are going to do things like this. We've seen them in gummy bears. It's come in forms of gum. So we really have to educate our kids. We really need to make them aware that this is out there, and never to take anything that hasn't been prescribed to them or given to them by their parents.
An important thing that parents have those potentially life-saving discussions with their children. How else can the community help? Is there a group that they can join, or mostly just help share the awareness? I would guess service clubs and other groups maybe invite you to come and speak and address the issue. What can the community be doing to help increase this awareness?
Well, I think, when you learn about fentanyl, you think, first of all, this can't affect your family. And if that's what you think, you need to think again. It can happen to anyone. There is no socioeconomic boundary here. We're seeing it in all ages. There's an increase, of course, between 18 and 24 years of age, and then we're seeing it in an increase in seniors even now. So I think if you can spread the word on fentanyl, have the discussions with your family and your children, well, then you're a step ahead of everyone else. And you can always call us, too. We've got lots of information to put out and resources through all of the other fentanyl organizations in the U.S.
So give us that information, how people can find out more, your website, a phone number, however else people can access this information and find out more about your organization and find resources through you.
Well, they can always call us at Voices for Awareness, and the best way to contact us is through email, and that's Andrea at Voices for Awareness, or they can go right on to our voicesforawareness.com and send us their request or contact us through the website there. That's the best way to get a hold of us, and we can provide them with any information that they would like to share.
Such an incredibly important topic. And again, for any listeners who are parts of any groups or organizations, church groups, getting the word out is going to be vital. And feel free to reach out to Voices for Awareness and help spread this just incredibly important information. I'd like to thank my guest today, Andrea Thomas, Executive Director for the Voices for Awareness Foundation. This is such a huge issue. Please contact her and her organization, contact our state legislatures and the governor, and encourage that the decriminalization of fentanyl be reversed, because it's an incredible scourge on our society. Thank you again, Andrea, for joining us.
Thank you.
This has been Issues and Answers from Town Square Media. If you would like to suggest a topic for our weekly program, simply open our station app and hit the app chat feature to send us a note about an issue you would like to hear discussed on Issues and Answers. You can also reach us by phone by dialing 970-242-7788. I'm Carl Hughes. Join us next week for another round of Issues and Answers with Town Square Media.